are starting tonight with an exclusive first look at an interview with President Biden you will only see on NBC with Lester Holt, pressing him on his Supreme Court vacancy. And that's just one of the many issues the president faces, including inflation at its highest level since Joe Montana won the Super Bowl. We're live at the White House. Those vaccine protests up in Canada are now hurting Michigan. The governor there telling Canada they need to reopen a key bridge. Which U.S. cities could be next? And on Capitol Hill, the January 6th committee says there are information gaps in former President Trump's call logs from that day, and the controversy today about what Mr. Trump may have flushed down the toilet. And critics say L.A. is using the glitz and glamour of the Super Bowl to mask a major problem: homelessness. Later in our show, we'll hear from one woman who says she's being pushed aside by the city. Hi, everyone. I'm Kristen Welker, in for my friend Hallie Jackson. And just in, a first look at the NBC News exclusive interview with President Biden. Mr. Biden sat down just a short time ago with Lester Holt for a wide-ranging discussion that will air before Super Bowl 56 on Sunday. And today, Lester asked him about one of the biggest decisions he is facing as president, his nominee for the Supreme Court.
Can I ask you where you stand right now in your nomination process for Supreme Court? What your short list looks like? Or if you want to name the nominee right here, we'd be happy to hear you.
Well, first of all, the short list are nominees who are incredibly well qualified and documented. They were the honor students. They come from the best universities. They have experience. Some on the bench, some on the practice.
What's the number you're at? 4, 5, 6?
Well, what I've done is I've taken about 4 people and done the deep dive on them, meaning this thorough background checks, and to see if there's anything in the background that would make them not qualified.
Is it important that you believe they'll get a vote from the Republican side?
Well, I think whomever I pick will get a vote from the Republican side for the following reason. I'm not looking to make an ideological choice here. I'm looking for someone to replace Judge Breyer with the same kind of capacity Judge Breyer had, with an open mind, who understands the Constitution, interprets it in a way that is consistent with the mainstream interpretation of the Constitution.
Well, that is really fascinating to hear the president talking about his potential pick. And at this moment, the president is talking behind closed doors with Senate Democrats about the Supreme Court vacancy. But that's not the only thing he is dealing with the inflation report showing prices up 7.5% since last January. That's the highest level in 40 years, folks. And it's putting a damper on the president's polls, with the latest average showing his job approval at roughly 40%. He hasn't been over 50% since August. Let's get right to it with my friend and colleague at the White House, Mike Memoli. So, Mike, wow, it's just so fascinating to hear the president talk with Lester about how he's thinking about this big choice that he has to make. Sounds like his short list is about 4 names. What does that tell you about how close he is to a decision?
Yeah, Kristen, there were a lot of tea leaves, a lot to unpack from the president's answers there on the Supreme Court choice before him. But certainly the big headline is 4. 4 is we knew he was, you were part of the reporting we had just a few days ago that the list was down to less than 12. But getting down to 4, where he's really done that deep dive, is a significant bit of news there in terms of just how short the short list is at this point. You know, it's really telling, because we know the president has been preparing for this choice for a long time. He's had briefings with his team even before he took the oath of office last January about what his Supreme Court possibilities would be. So really significant there. Another thing that stuck out to me was the president saying that, you know, the potential pick he's going to make could be from somebody on the bench, but it might also be somebody from you know, the legal community more broadly. That's interesting, because so many of the real finalists that we were looking at are potentially like Ketanji Jackson Brown, who's on the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals. Of course, Michelle Childs from the Circuit Court down in South Carolina, who's being nominated for the D.C. Circuit as well. And so I think I'm going to make a prediction to you, Kristen. I think the White House is going to come out with a clarification in the next 24 hours, maybe to say that the president really was only saying he'd only gotten to 4 so far and that there are more briefings, more deep dives to continue in the few days ahead. Because we know he's got a deadline of about 18 days from now to make that pick.
That's right. You and I are on the same wavelength, Mike. I was thinking the same exact thing. I will be looking for Jen Psaki's briefing tomorrow to see if she has any more texture to add to that response from the president. Look, I had a chance to interview the chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee, Dick Durbin, earlier today about the timing, and what he said really struck me. I want to play it for you and get your reaction on the other side. You're confident he can make a pick by the end of this month, as he has said he wants to?
I got my fingers crossed. I want him to do the right thing, and I want him to take the time to do it well. But I'm anxious, and so the committee, I'm sure, will communicate that to the president. We want to get started.
So that's going to be Dick Durbin's message to the president, that he's anxious. Mike, what are you hearing about the conversations that the president's having on Capitol Hill about his potential pick?
Well, the White House has been walking this fine line. They don't want it to be seen that the president is rushing this choice because obviously it's a big moment. The first African-American woman to be nominated for the high court. They want to make it seem as if, and it is being done, that there's a very deliberative, thoughtful process. But we know the president's consultations have really been ramping up. This meeting at the White House right now, the biggest group discussion that he's had so far. But we know he's been calling senators individually, including Republicans. Remember, we just learned yesterday, Mitt Romney, not even on the Judiciary Committee, Republican from Utah, he was one of those who got a call from the president and sounded like he's open to voting for whoever he nominates.
Yeah, I think that's been one of the striking narratives to come out of these conversations that we've heard on Capitol Hill. Republicans saying they're open to hearing what the president has to say. Lindsey Graham among those who's expressed his openness and willingness to consider Judge Michelle Childs, of course, from his hometown of South Carolina. Mike, let me ask you about the other big headline today, and of course that's inflation. Prices are at a 40-year high, and you and I talk about this all of the time. What do these numbers mean in terms of the president getting any more of his agenda passed? We're already in a midterm election year. How big of a setback does the White House see this as?
Well, Kristen, you know the White House was bracing for a bad number today. They got a bad number today. They're trying to put all the context they can around it. For instance, we saw in a paper statement from the president talking about, for instance, a moderation in the prices of automobiles, which had been one of the bigger drivers of the inflation number over the past year. I thought it was really significant, Kristen, because we know when it relates to Build Back Better, Joe Manchin, senator from West Virginia, has cited inflation as the #1 reason why he opposes moving forward on that. But the president was in a swing district in Virginia today with a sign behind him that said lowering prices for American families. There were also signs around him that said Build Back Better. The White House has been trying to argue that getting pieces of the Build Back Better legislation through will lower prices for Americans, but it's still a real point of contention within his own party.
It sure is, and a lot of pressure on the White House to at least get something passed before voters go to the polls. Mike Memoli at the White House breaking down all of these headlines for us. Great to see you, Mike. Thank you. And tune in to the NBC Nightly News tonight, where you will hear more from Lester's interview with the president on Ukraine, the economy, Afghanistan, and indoor mask mandates. That's at 6:30 p.m. Eastern, ahead of the full interview this Sunday before the Super Bowl. We know you'll tune in for that. Let's stick with inflation, though, and look at that real-world impact on your bottom line. The Dow Jones down today about 500 points. The other major indices also taking a hit. Plus, if you're hosting a Super Bowl party this weekend, here's how much more you'll be paying. Chicken up 10%, ground beef up 13%. Your snacks, your alcohol, your soda, even televisions, all of the prices are up compared to last year. And here's why you're feeling the burn here. Worker wages have only jumped 0.1% when you take inflation into account. Ben Popkin is here to break this all down with us. Ben, it's so great to see you. Thanks for being here. And we talked about this with Mike. You probably just heard the conversation. The White House saying, look, forecasters are saying that inflation is going to ease this year, that soon those numbers are going to start to come down. But they haven't come down yet. Is the White House misguided here, or do you see a peak in our future?
Well, hello, Kristen. I mean, we are in some ways past that peak already. When you look month to month, like year to year, the inflation rate came in really high today. But month to month, it has actually already started to slow down. The increase, the peak was 0.8 to 0.9% in October, November. In January, it was 0.6%, and that was about what it was in December. So we're already starting to see things moderate a bit. Critics have attacked Biden for inflation, and to some extent they're right, but maybe for the wrong reasons. The administration has purposely let inflation run a little bit higher than normal, held back on those interest rate increases because they have some other goals. They want to increase employment. They want to get closer to that full employment number and increase jobs and pay. When inflation goes up, businesses have to spend more on labor. People have more money to spend on goods and services. That achieves these social goals. But now we're hearing that the Federal Reserve says we are close to full employment, and it has ratcheted up 3 interest rate hikes for this year. This is after coming from essentially rock bottom, near zero interest rates for the past few years. And so when those interest rates rise, businesses and consumers are going to cut spending, and that will slow down inflation. So that's why we think it's going to start to moderate.
Well, and one of the things that consumers are also dealing with, Ben, is less help from the federal government than they got last year. There are no enhanced child tax credits for families, no stimulus checks. We know also that business costs are going up. You were just talking about this because of supply chain issues. So I guess the question is, in addition to looking at that Fed rate that's going to go up, the interest rate, what else needs to happen in order to address this crisis? Is there anything else?
Well, don't mean to be insensitive about it, but sometimes it comes down to these raw bone economic decisions. Fed Chair Powell himself said companies are raising prices because they can. Despite these increases, consumers have kept going out shopping. One of the things we do in the NBC News BizTech unit is we listen to all these company earning calls. We actually listen to them. And on call after call, executives across the board, across the supermarket, have been talking about these price increases and their confidence that they can keep doing it. And these are not just price increases passing along costs. They're actually expanding their profit margins. They're making more money than they did before. 2/3 of publicly traded companies are reporting greater profit margins. So that's the thing with these prices. The cure for them, they say, is for high prices is high prices. Eventually, they get to a point where people stop paying them, and the demand goes down, and then we'll start to see inflation go down as well.
All right, great information on a really complicated issue, but something that is impacting everyone. Ben Popkin, thank you so much for that. Really appreciate it. Well, the city of Windsor, Ontario, tonight seeking an injunction against those Freedom Convoy protesters blocking the Ambassador Bridge, saying they will be physically removed if they don't leave, as police warn of arrests without a warrant. Those protests causing economic gridlock as traffic on the Canada side of the bridge is at a virtual halt. Look at these images. Ford, GM, Toyota, and Stellantis, which is, of course, formerly Chrysler, have been forced to cancel and cut shifts, temporarily shutting down production at some North American and Canadian plants because parts just could not get there. Michigan's Governor Gretchen Whitmer today urging Canada to reopen traffic on the Ambassador Bridge, calling the economic impact on her state, quote, unacceptable. Joining us now to talk about this is Cal Perry. Cal, you are there at the Blue Water Bridge in Port Huron, where the Michigan Department of Transportation has been redirecting traffic, but the situation there is not much better. Set the scene for us. What is the impact there, and what are people saying to you?
Yeah, look, you can see the trucks backed up behind me. The waits have been between 2 and 5 hours. Keep in mind, the bridge behind me runs at half capacity of that for the Ambassador Bridge. I'll give you a real-world impact right off the bat that'll follow the conversation you guys have been having. Canada's #2 export are cars. America takes 90% of those cars. All of those cars are stuck in Canada and have been for a few days. So the price of cars in the U.S., which we all know is going up, is only going to continue to rise. J.D. Power says that there are now 1 million cars on U.S. car lots when there would normally be 3 million. So the economic impact of what is a very small protest is going to be widely felt, Kristen.
For sure. What are people saying about the potential for violence? So far, these protests have been mostly peaceful, but we know that residents are really concerned.
Yeah, and you have 2 protests going on in Canada, 2 main ones. You have the one in Ottawa going on, which is a large protest downtown area around those government buildings. And then in Windsor, which is that crossing to Detroit, you have a much smaller one. The question is, what are the police in Windsor going to do with that smaller protest? That small protest is causing this havoc that's going to cost people hundreds of millions of dollars. How do they clear it? I think the fear of violence lies there.
Well, the protests are all over the map now, really, across the globe, with similar scenes playing out in France, New Zealand, and Australia. DHS now tracking reports of potential convoy in L.A. this weekend before the Super Bowl, and here in D.C. for the State of the Union. So what are officials saying about this threat, Cal? Just how big is it?
Yeah, and I think this ideology of shutting down the economy on these protests is sort of growing. We're seeing it along the U.S.-Canadian border. And as you said, Department of Homeland Security today in the U.S. put out a bulletin. They do put out a great deal of bulletins, but this bulletin specifically talked about a possible truck protest starting at the Super Bowl, ending at the State of the Union on March the 1st in Washington, D.C. And it specifically says in the bulletin that they're worried about not only gridlock in American cities, but they're worried about counter-protests. And I don't need to tell you, Kristen, why. It's that fear of violence from that counter-protest or protest that clash that really has people concerned.
All right. Well, something that everyone is watching around the globe. Cal Perry, thank you so much for being there and for your great reporting. The House committee investigating January 6th says there are some gaps in President Trump's call log records from that day. In fact, they say there are no records of calls for several hours, but we know Mr. Trump spoke with Alabama Senator Tommy Tuberville and House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy then, because both of them have talked publicly about it. This is the former president denies claims that he flushed wads of documents down a White House toilet. That claim coming from a new book by New York Times reporter Maggie Haberman, which Axios got a preview of. Trump responded by calling it, quote, another fake story that is categorically untrue and simply made up. With that, I want to bring in Garrett Hake on Capitol Hill to talk about this. Garrett, you and I have been talking about this throughout the day. So talk about the latest reporting, because I know you've been working your sources on this, too, these gaps in the president's call log. What can you tell us, and how significant is this?
Well, the gaps are certainly frustrating to members of the January 6th committee who are trying to piece together as comprehensive of the president's picture of the president's day as they possibly can, who he talked to when and what actions he did or did not take. And they know, as you said, from the calls that have been publicly discussed, that President Trump spent a lot of that afternoon on the phone, but apparently not the White House phone. Apparently it was his cell phone, someone else's cell phone, or other means. And so the committee has to kind of go back to the drawing board to get the full picture of the president's activity. As regards to the flushing of these White House records, if indeed that's what occurred, this is sort of part of that same general issue. What was fairly well documented at the time, but the unorthodox practices of the Trump White House around how documents were handled, how information was stored, and how records were preserved. And it's got at least some Republican lawmakers even frustrated about what was going on at the White House at that time, as we heard today.
Well,
the law says you got to preserve records, so you preserve records.
He has a long list of things he's done that I consider to be very detrimental to the nation, and I add this to the list.
What we don't know yet, Kristen, is whether even that kind of frustration will lead to anything further, particularly on the Senate side, or whether this just kind of goes in the pile of those, smaller Trump-era controversies that kind of pop up and disappear before they even have a time to be properly vetted and investigated.
One of the things, Garrett, that I think is interesting about this latest revelation is that it kind of underscores how difficult it has been for the January 6th committee to piece together exactly what happened that day, to try to find some of the missing pieces. What are committee members saying about how they're approaching this really difficult task?
Well, officially, the committee's not commenting on any of the new news today, but we know that this has been the kind of thing that they've been trying to work around for quite some time, whether that's by going after the phone records of individuals who they know were in contact with the president or with the White House, whether it's trying to step up their effort to get Republican members of Congress to talk to them. That's one thing that I've been particularly focused on. You'll remember there was a week or two period where we saw a couple of days of inviting. First it was Scott Perry, then it was Jim Jordan, then Kevin McCarthy, invites for them to come talk to the committee. None of those men have been subpoenaed, and we know there were other Republican lawmakers who were in contact with the president on and around that day, in areas of interest to the committee. Do they decide to more aggressively pursue the testimony or the phone records of any of those lawmakers? I don't believe those decisions have been made yet by the committee, but it's very much part of what could potentially be their next step, figuring out how to handle exactly those challenges.
I think that's a really good point. And then let's talk about another revelation from earlier this week, the 15 boxes of presidential records that the National Archives recovered from Mar-a-Lago. Now, the president has said, look, I've been working in consult with the National Archives. There's been no issue here. But what are the questions they're trying to answer, and why are those documents so important, Garrett?
Well, the House Oversight Committee now says they're going to take a look at this. And the committee's chairman, Carolyn Maloney, thinks that it's possible that there was laws broken here, violations of the Presidential Records Act. So they want to look at that. But also there's an open question of exactly what was in this material that former President Trump apparently hung on to. Was it just kind of anodyne mementos of his time in the White House, the kind of thing that might ultimately end up in a presidential library, as the former president's statement suggested? Or was it potentially classified documents? Or is it the kind of things that Republicans spent years lambasting Hillary Clinton for being careless about, for example? So there are a lot of questions to be answered there. I can tell you on the legal front, our colleague Pete Williams has been trying to report this out, and his takeaway from the Department of Justice has been that they don't seem particularly exercised about this, that these kinds of things tend to happen. It's usually not then presidents, soon to be former presidents, who are packing their own boxes on the way out of the White House. And so it may be too early to get particularly engaged in the possibility that there might have been something criminal here, but it's going to be looked into, at least by the House.
A lot of complicated stuff, Garrett. You've been on top of it all day. Really appreciate your joining us. Great to see you.
Thanks, Kristen.
In one of the biggest changes to the workplace in decades, the Senate just passed bipartisan legislation ending forced arbitration for workers who are victims of sexual assault and harassment. So what does this mean? Well, this means that companies cannot force workers to settle sexual misconduct claims in a secretive process that often favors the people accused of harassment or assault. Employees can now file a suit in court with their own legal representation. The bill's headed to President Biden's desk to be signed into law. It would kick in right away and affect about 60 million workers all across the country. Well, in California, 18 million people are under heat advisories with record temperatures in some parts of the state. Along with the heat comes dangerous Santa Ana winds. They helped fuel the brush fire in Laguna Beach. Firefighters evacuated residents because it came dangerously close to homes. The fire grew to about 145 acres before firefighters were able to get a handle on it. And this year's Super Bowl could be the hottest on record, if you can believe it. Temperatures in L.A. are expected to be in the 80s, maybe even as high as 90, and expected to stretch right through kickoff on Sunday. So what is behind this winter heat wave? There's only one person who can tell us, and that is Al Roker. Al, it's great to see you. So what's going on here?
Well, here's the deal, Kristen. As you mentioned, 18 million people under heat advisories. And here's the interesting thing. This is the first time since 2005 that there has been a heat advisory posted anywhere in the United States. And you see it goes from San Fernando all the way down to San Diego. And we're in the midst of a heat wave for Los Angeles. The hottest February temperature ever was 95, back February 20th, 1995. The forecast high for today, 89 degrees. Yesterday they were 83. Tomorrow, 86, 88 Saturday. Super Bowl Sunday could be around 87 degrees. That's 5 straight days with highs in the 80s. Big area of high pressure pumping in air, hot air, dry air coming in from the east. And so look at these temperatures. Fresno, 14 degrees above average. L.A., almost 20 degrees above average. And as far as records are concerned tomorrow, they may see a record in L.A., Palm Springs, Niles, Vegas, Sacramento, Santa Maria. Now, we will see temperatures moderate just a bit, but still staying above average, Kristen, right on through the weekend. And, of course, Super Bowl, as you mentioned. So the top 5 warmest Super Bowls, number 1 was January 14th, 1973, Super Bowl 7 in Los Angeles. Got up to 84 degrees. Well, the forecast as the Rams host the Bengals right here on NBC and Peacock, at 6:30. Kickoff, sunny, very warm, around 83. Could be a little warmer. We're going to be watching that very closely. And players are going to have to be dealing with making sure they're hydrated and all sorts of issues. And folks, of course, who are going to be coming in from all over have to deal with all of that warmth, Kristen.
Yeah, they're going to have to bring their water, wear their short sleeve shirts. Al, let me ask you, because obviously so much focus on the Super Bowl, but there are broader implications here. You just mapped a lot of them out. How concerned are you about the conditions, particularly when you think about the possibility for drought conditions?
Well, right now, Kristen, 66% of California is in a severe drought. December was fairly wet. But January, very dry, really dry January. In fact, San Francisco has had no rain for 33 days. So as you can see, it's not the worst they've had, but as you can also see with those Santa Ana winds, fire can kick up, those wildfires, those little brush fires can kick up pretty quickly. Right now, no red flag warnings, but that could change as conditions warrant, Kristen.
Al, it's always so good to see you. We're talking about the heat, but I know you will be freezing cold again tomorrow on the Today Show. Back out on the Plaza set for the Olympics. We will be tuned in and looking forward to it. Al, great to see you.
Take care.
Coming up, MLB Spring Training, baseball's opening day, all up in the air. But there may be hope. The commissioner speaking out for the first time today about a lockout that's been going on since December. The plan to get things back on track. All hope might not be lost for baseball's opening day, as we're hearing from MLB Commissioner Rob Manfred for the first time since he and the owners decided to lock out the players in December. The players and the owners will head back to the negotiating table on Saturday after 11 days without an offer. This is good news, folks, and Manfred says he's optimistic. He's saying he's optimistic. The reality is time is running out, though. Pitchers and catchers are supposed to report in just 6 days. So the question is, what happens next? Let's go to Morgan Chesky now. So, Morgan, let's break this all down. Manfred says this will be a, quote, good proposal, but the players aren't happy right now. And here's Max Scherzer of the New York Mets, who's on the union's bargaining committee a few days ago, laying out what the players want. No luxury taxes, better pay for younger players, an end to tanking. So explain all of that and just how big is the gap here that we're talking about?
That's a pretty big gap, Kristen. You know, this is the second longest work stoppage we've seen in MLB in its history. And right now, the two sides have not really had a chance to sit down at the table in weeks. And they're expected to do so here this upcoming weekend. But there are still some core economic sticking points that they have not been able to wrap their head around. The league, meanwhile, has made a few concessions, but the players' union says that that's simply not enough right now. And we're kind of coming up against a bit of a tough deadline here. We know that spring training set to start in just a few weeks' time. Opening day still slated for March 31st. But as we get closer to March, that could be in real peril. And we could potentially see the season be impacted for the first time since 1994, 1995. Of course, baseball fans will remember that was one of the years where they didn't have a postseason at all. We're a long way from that, but these economic sticking points are really keeping any progress from being made right now. And that's what we heard from Commissioner Rob Manfred today, speaking publicly for the first time since this strike went into effect back on December 2nd. Kristen?
Well, Morgan, you take me to my next point, which is the tough timeline that they're up against. Players are not going to be happy. They're making that very clear. Take a look at this poll from December. It shows a third of sports fans and nearly half of avid fans would be less interested in baseball if there's a work stoppage. So the league knows that there's a lot of pressure to get something done. How does that timeline potentially impact these negotiations?
I mean, every day makes it a bit more compressed. We do know that the league had asked for a federal mediator to come in and assist with these negotiations. That was rejected by the players' union, saying that if a collective bargaining agreement is to be reached, they should probably start doing some bargaining, and that means getting both sides at the table. That will be resumed this upcoming weekend. We do know that with spring training potentially able to be abbreviated from 4 weeks to 3 weeks, that does buy fans and the league a bit more time when it comes to reaching some sort of deal. But the date that everyone's really looking at now is March 1st. If some sort of agreement isn't reached by then, we could see the regular season be impacted and not just an abbreviated spring training, which at least as of for right now, both MLB and the Players Union seems at least semi-open to having that be somewhat shortened to reach this collective bargaining agreement and have it be mutually beneficial for both sides. So that calendar date is looking an awfully lot bigger right now when it comes to March 1st, Kristen, because nobody wants to see a shortened baseball season, even if it's by just a few games.
You're
Kristen?
so right, and sports fans all across the country are going to be watching this so closely. I'm from Philadelphia, where we are serious about our baseball and our sports, and Manfred says MLB's going to agree to potentially a universal designated hitter, which basically, if you break it down, means I'll never get to see a Phillies pitcher hit ever again, Morgan. What's up with that?
I mean, it's probably a good thing. It's probably a good thing, right? I mean, God bless those pitchers who were able to get some home runs in there. But for the most part, you know, they don't have to swing at air anymore. And they can be just like their counterparts in the American League and have a DH, a designated hitter, go in there and do that job for them. So, you know, that is one of the concessions that MLB has made so far. They've also said they want to raise the league minimums a little bit, but the Players Union was very quick to say that this minimum salary raise that they're proposing is just a drop in the bucket for what they want to see for a lot of the players that you and I may not know by name, but are still in the league working hard and wanting to have those salaries raised, who may not be the superstars. So a lot left on the table to discuss here in the next few weeks, and fingers crossed we'll still have a season intact.
Fingers crossed. Sports fans all across the country have their fingers crossed. Morgan Chesky, thanks for breaking all of that down for us. We really appreciate it. Coming up, former President Obama rallying House Democrats today. How his appearance could be part of a bigger plan to rally voters for the midterm elections. And more problems for Peloton. The company introduced a new CEO this week, but workers upset over layoffs were not having it. How they hijacked a company-wide meeting. That's next. Let's get you over to the 5 things our team thinks you should know about tonight. Number 1, U.S. intelligence says the Russian military could take 9 different routes into Ukraine and its capital within 48 hours. This while Russian and Ukrainian negotiators met in Berlin today to talk about the crisis at their border. This was their second meeting in months, but it's unclear if any sort of compromise was reached to calm tensions. Number 2, Jerry Harris, a former star in the popular Netflix series Cheer, has pleaded guilty in his child pornography case. Harris, 22, has been held without bond since his arrest in September of 2020 for allegedly soliciting minors for sex at cheerleading competitions. Number 3, a Peloton meeting with its new CEO took a turn after some laid-off employees crashed it. The conversation ended early when current and former workers started firing off angry comments over the company's job cuts and management. We told you earlier this week Peloton fired 2,800 people this week and replaced its CEO. Number 4, Uber seems to be bouncing back. The ride-hailing giant reporting more riders last quarter, about a 67% increase. There's been a boost in food deliveries, too. The company says they're finally approaching pre-pandemic levels of business. And number 5, an out-of-this-world discovery. Astronomers say they found a new planet orbiting the star closest to the sun called Proxima D, It's some 25 trillion miles away from Earth. That's just about 4 light years away, in case you're wondering, and that is pretty remarkable. Well, guess who's back? Former President Barack Obama. He just wrapped up a private virtual meeting with the House Democratic Caucus, where he stressed how important it is for the party to stay unified and to let people know the country's on a much better path ever since they took over. This was just part of the Democrats' day-long messaging summit. Mr. Obama was also part of a keynote conversation with Speaker Nancy Pelosi. It comes as Democrats are facing a tough fight to keep their majority in the November midterms, and President Biden's approval rating just hit a new low. Sahil Kapoor has been reporting on all of this throughout the day. So, Sahil, I'm really fascinated by the fact that President Obama decided to talk to Democrats now. Seems like he's trying to get a little bit of a jump start because during the presidential race, he got criticized for waiting too late to come off of the sidelines. So what do we know about what was discussed?
Kristen, we know that this was an invitation sent by the House Democratic Caucus, organized by the caucus chair, Hakeem Jeffries, and President Obama agreed to show up and talk to them. This was initially supposed to be an issues conference, but they postponed that. They asked him to stick around for a virtual caucus meeting that they're having on messaging, and he agreed to do that. Now, a source familiar with President Obama's thinking tells me that he will stress the need for Democrats to stay united. He will encourage them to brag about their achievements, to not be bashful about the things they've accomplished, and to be open about the fact that they believe the country is much better off as a result of Democratic control. Some of this stuff appears to be lessons that President Obama learned from his own tenure, specifically his own first midterm election, 2010, which was a disaster for Democrats. One of the things that he got criticized for, including by his own vice president then, Joe Biden, was not bragging about his achievements enough. It seems like he's heeded that lesson, encouraging Democrats not to repeat his mistake.
Yeah, the person's name I did not hear you mention, Sahil, former President Trump. What do you think his message is when it comes to how to handle issues surrounding the former president? Is there a concern that some Democrats are going to be tempted to try to run against Trump and not focus enough on the future?
Kristen, I think every clear-thinking Democrat knows at this point that you can't run against Donald Trump when he's out of power in an election that he's not even on the ballot. I think there obviously is a temptation for Democrats who are facing stiff headwinds in the midterm election to seek the solace of running against the former president, who is very good at mobilizing the Democratic base. But the reality is, as I mentioned, he doesn't have power. He's not on the ballot, and Democrats are going to be judged on their record here. They're also going to be, they also want to make the election a choice between them and the alternative, which is the Republican Party, they say, is enthralled to Trump. So I suspect we will hear his name more often, but Democrats are going to have to make that connection as to why voters need to think about and care about Donald Trump when he's not on the ballot. I spoke yesterday to Sean Patrick Maloney, who is the chair of the Democrats' House campaign arm. He said Kevin McCarthy is doing the bidding of Trump by defending this RNC resolution that is, in his view, an attempt to legitimize the January 6th attack. So I suspect we'll hear some of that filter in, but I would be very surprised if President Obama says the words Donald Trump at all at this caucus meeting.
Yeah, I would too. I think that's a really good point, Sahil. Let's talk a little bit more in depth about the timing. Why now? And again, to the point that I made earlier, former President Obama did get criticized, including from some Democrats, for not coming off of the sidelines earlier during the presidential race. Is the timing of this an attempt to say, I'm getting ahead of the curve this time?
That depends, I think, on whether he gets on the campaign trail earlier this time. I really don't know when he'll do it. I mean, it's pretty clear that he will at some point because he has hit the campaign trail in every election since he left office. It'd be a big surprise if he didn't, and Democrats are expecting and counting on him to get out there and to rally the Democratic base like few can do. He obviously, is talented at that. But his midterm election plans have not come into focus yet. It remains to be seen who asks him to campaign for them. Where he goes, whether, Democrats in certain competitive primaries across the country are jockeying for his endorsement, as has happened in the past. I think a lot of this remains to be seen, but the more we see President Biden's approval rating sink, and now it's currently in the low 40s last I checked, I think the more in demand former President Obama is going to be, because he has a different kind of status at this point. He doesn't have the negatives that are sticking to him in a way that an incumbent president does. So it's possible that we'll see Democrats seek him out, not only as a way to rally Democratic voters, but to make an argument to swing voters in a way that he can do, because he has been successful at rallying them in the past as well, Kristen.
All right, great reporting. And I know when he is out on the trail, you will be out front and center with your reporting on that as well. Sahil, thank you so much. Great to see you. NBC News covers hundreds of stories each day, and because you couldn't possibly read, watch, or listen to them all, our bureau teams have done that for you. So this is what they tell us is going on in their regions in the segment we like to call The Local. From our West Coast Bureau, California is suing Tesla over allegations of discrimination. We told you about the possible lawsuit earlier this week. The court complaint claims that one of the company's factories racially segregates black workers and that those workers are subject to racial slurs, unequal pay, and job assignments. Tesla is already facing at least 4 race discrimination lawsuits. From our Midwest Bureau, an Ohio affordable housing plan is in the tank after Dave Chappelle threatened to pull his businesses out. The comedian is planning to open a restaurant and comedy club in his hometown of Yellow Springs, the same village that wanted to approve these housing units. Chappelle hasn't publicly said why he opposes the plan. And from our Northeast Bureau, there's a new Susan Collins on the block, and she's the first black woman to lead a federal bank. She's leaving her post as the provost of the University of Michigan to lead the Boston Fed. There are only 3 other women and 2 men of color that are regional federal bank presidents in the country. Coming up, people living in Los Angeles homeless camps say they are being pushed to the side to make room for this Sunday's Super Bowl, why some say the city is looking for a quick fix rather than long-term solutions. With millions of eyes on Los Angeles this weekend for the Super Bowl, the city is trying to put its best foot forward. And locals say one way they're trying to do that is by sweeping the city's growing homelessness crisis under the rug. Crews have been seen dismantling homeless encampments near SoFi Stadium ahead of the big game. But officials say the cleanup has nothing to do with that and is about addressing concerns like fire safety in the area. But one woman whose campsite under the freeway got cleared tells Guad Venegas she doesn't buy that.
Dawn is one of the tens of thousands living on the streets of Los Angeles. A few weeks before the Super Bowl, she was cleared from the campsite under the 405 freeway, where she says she had been staying for 2 years.
They just came and cleaned us out, took everything. You know, because of the Super Bowl, they just pushed us aside because we're homeless. And that ain't right.
The cleanup, one of many taking place around Los Angeles County as they prepared to host the Super Bowl. The Los Angeles Homeless Services Authority recorded 66,000 homeless individuals in LA County at the start of the pandemic. The new count is set to begin this month and is expected to be much larger.
You know most of the people that live
Yes. Here? Madeline is one of the volunteers helping the homeless and advocating for additional resources.
If you live in Los Angeles, it seems overwhelming. There's so many unhoused people living on the streets. It seems like an unfixable problem because there are so many people.
Local and state officials are working together, allocating billions to build housing specifically for the homeless or those in danger of becoming homeless. Through Project Homekey, the state made 6,000 housing units available in its first phase and is expected to add another 55,000 over the next few years. The last report indicates less than 2,000 units have been made available in Los Angeles. In recent months, the city of LA has voted to make street camping illegal in more than 200 locations, while across the county, camps like the one where Dawn lived are getting cleared.
This is essentially a hotel district next to the airport, with this boulevard connecting to the stadium less than 2 miles away. Now, the last encampment was cleared right over there, yet right next to it, but out of sight, is another encampment that was left untouched.
The camp removal was executed by the state agency Caltrans, which is in charge of the freeway areas. The agency telling NBC News the area needed to be cleared due to a fire safety issue, adding the department is coordinating with local partners to provide outreach and support, including the Los Angeles Homeless Services Authority. The Super Bowl stadium is in the city of Inglewood, adjacent to Los Angeles. The mayor there insists the cleanups have nothing to do with the event.
This is something that occurs year in and year out. So this one, it was just time for this one. The last major cleanup was at the intersection of Prairie and 111, which is not 11 blocks from SoFi, and it was done 3 months ago.
Yet for locals, the problem is as real as it gets. The LA Times recently published a survey that found 94% of voters believe homelessness is a very serious problem in Los Angeles, with visitors in town for the Super Bowl unable to ignore that even in the great city of angels, thousands sleep on the street every night.
Really powerful, Guad. And of course, Guad is joining us now to talk more about his reporting. I want to follow up with you on that poll that you just referenced, the fact that a majority of people in L.A. think that homelessness is a serious issue. Guad, how does that square with the actions by local leaders that you just mapped out?
Kristen, well, local leaders are doing what they can. This is a problem that has been happening in Southern California for years now, right? So this survey just shines a light on how voters think the homeless problem needs to be dealt with. We should also add that that survey found that 1 in 3 voters in L.A. also say that they have either been homeless or in danger of becoming homeless. So the survey also states that 57% want a short-term solution. Why? This is because you have camps all across the city. Meanwhile, 30% do understand that it requires a long-term solution. And the reason why people want to see change fast is because these camps are seen everywhere. I can tell you right now, I could get in a car from where I'm at, drive 5 minutes, and find 3 different homeless encampments 5 minutes away from where I am. And most people in Los Angeles County can say the same. So that's why they want these to be removed for several reasons. One of them is people feeling unsafe in their own neighborhood. So it's a complex problem that does require a long-term solution. What they're doing now is working with the state to create more housing.
Well, it's a really great report. And of course, we're going to continue to track it, particularly as we look forward to the 2024 Olympics, which will be held there as well. Thank you so much, Guad Venegas. And that's a wrap for this hour. Gabe Gutierrez will be in the seat tomorrow, filling in for Hallie Jackson. Same time, same place. Coverage picks up right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.